So let's talk about 3 different shoulder impingements, 3 strategies, and 3 solutions. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. All right. It's Wednesday, so that means tomorrow's Thursday, which means that we have the Coffee and Coaches Conference call at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Go to my professional Facebook page if you would like to join us. We've had amazing groups the last 3 or 4 calls, so please join us. Discussion is getting really deep. Everybody's getting smart, so I really like this. Let's dig in. I got a really good lead-in question that's going to take us in a little bit different direction, which will be kind of cool. So this is from Mihail. And Mihail says, "Hey Bill." Hey Mihail. He said, "During shoulder flexion test, when measuring it the right way," so he's making reference to my YouTube video on how to measure shoulder flexion. He says, "What's happening when the elbow starts to move laterally? Is there normal motion available at the shoulder girdle? And the only way to get the arm overhead is through shoulder internal rotation. So if you keep raising the arm overhead while allowing the internal rotation to happen, is movement happening only at the shoulder joint with no movement to scap, clavicle, etc.?" Mihail, you are on point. So this is a very specific situation where we've got a posterior compressive strategy that is going to limit shoulder elevation because it's going to eliminate the external rotation element of elevation. The minute you steal that, you're diving right into internal rotation and you're moving towards internal rotation, but we've got a scapula that can't move, and so we have a very specific limitation, and you start banging into the compressive strategy at about 90 degrees of shoulder flexion, which would typically be one of our impingement tests. So what I would like to do, Mihail, is I would like to take this situation and let us look at 3 different impingements, because I think a lot of impingement gets packaged into one thing, and I think the current strategies for most PTs is to try to look at they're calling it subacromial pain syndrome rather than subacromial impingement. We don't want to look at these impingements the same because the source of the limitation that is creating the compressive strategy in the shoulder that results in pain is not the same. So we're going to look at 3 different situations here, and we get to use old school PT school orthopedic textbook impingement tests, because this is why those impingement tests were valuable at one point in time. They just didn't know why, so we're going to tell you why here. So we're going to look at Hawkins-Kennedy, we're going to look at the near test, and then we'll look at a painful arc. Okay? Now, I don't use these tests because my table test will tell me exactly where these compressive strategies are. Just because somebody doesn't have pain with these positions, it doesn't mean that there's not a compressive strategy there. It just means that it's not sensitized, so everybody kind of ignores it. And then when somebody does have pain, they tend to blame the poor little rotator cuff. It's not his fault. He's just the result. And so let's talk about where this compressive stuff comes from. Okay? So let's go Hawkins-Kennedy first. So Hawkins-Kennedy is that test at about 90 degrees of shoulder flexion where they drive internal rotation, and you always get that wincy face on everybody there. Okay? And so what this is caused by a limitation in shoulder flexion below 90 degrees. So this is a posterior lower compression that steals the early phase of external rotation of arm elevation. So again, go to YouTube and check out my shoulder flexion video so you can actually see how to measure this thing. Okay? We're also going to end up with an anterior orientation of the thorax, because for me to have that posterior lower compression, I got all the other stuff laid on top of it. So I got dorsal rostral, I got pump handle down. So again, I'm dealing with a lot of compressive strategy and the anterior orientation. So I've got an early loss of shoulder flexion, but because of the orientation, I'm going to hit that IR early, and then I'm going to run out of internal rotation very quickly. So again, I get this compressive strategy right at 90 degrees. So here's the solution. Number 1, we want to eliminate interference. So we're going to avoid bilateral symmetrical exercises. So most of this stuff with a barbell in your hands is probably a bad idea. Anything that's considered a lat development exercise is probably a bad idea, with an exception that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So that takes chin-ups and stuff like that off the table. Next step, restore the dynamic ISA. I have to have an ISA that can move, so I know that I can recapture breathing excursion. We're going to keep the activities below 90 degrees of shoulder elevation. Because what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to capture that posterior lower expansion, but I don't want to provoke any symptoms in the process. So again, everything's going to be below that shoulder level. The exception might be that we can use a variation of a deep squat pull down. This might not be the first exercise of choice, but it might be something that we can go to because there's a turn that's associated with this. So once we drive something with a reach below shoulder level or a supported activity below shoulder level, we may be able to access a higher level of flexion without any symptoms whatsoever, and especially in this deep squat where we're going to get some of that posterior lower expansion in that position. And then we can superimpose a turn. So we're actually going to use the compensatory strategy that Mihail was talking about to our advantage. And we create that turn and we create a reciprocal expansion as we move one arm through the pull down at a time. And that's going to give us the expansion that we want. So there you go. So there's your solution. This is for the Hawkins-Kennedy positive test. Okay. So let's go to the near impingement test. So this is compression that occurs at about 120 degrees of elevation or higher. Okay, so a positive NIRS test. So this is an upper dorsal rostral compressive problem. So we're talking about the spine of the scapula upward. Now, to get compression there, that means we've also got a pump handle that's probably going to get compressed down. So let's move to our solutions. Number one, we want to eliminate interference. Heavy trapezius exercises will probably be off the table. We're probably going to have to lay off pressing, reaching, and pulling at 120 degrees or above, because that's where our provocation is going to be. So this also takes bilateral ITs and Ys and PNF D2 flexions off the table, as well as horizontal pressing. Now, we need a dynamic ISA like always, but here's the kicker. I need to be able to capture an exhaled ISA. So to get volume into the upper part of the thorax, where I need the expansion to finish shoulder flexion without a compressive strategy, I have to be able to reclose the ISA into an exhale position and then inhale from that position with the expansion upward rather than expanding the ISA outward in a compensation. If I expand the ISA too much, then I don't have enough pressure to push the volume upward to create the expansion in the thorax. So make sure you can get an exhaled ISA. Because of the position of the compression, we've got a lot of exercises that we can use now. So we can go prone and we can go support through the upper extremities in most cases. So we can start somewhere around the general vicinity of 90 degrees for a lot of these activities. And we're going to work on maintaining a yielding strategy in the dorsal rostral. We're going to drive the pump handle up, and then we're going to progressively increase the degree of shoulder elevation in these exercises. So eventually what we're going to do is we're going to be able to work towards an inverted position in many of these cases. To reintroduce the higher reaching and to make sure that we've got the ability to close the ISA, I really like a reciprocal alternating pull down activity in standing that hopefully you can see right here. This is a nice little activity to reintroduce some of the resisted stuff. It's very similar to the squat variation that I talked about with the Hawkins-Kennedy impingement problem, but this is a nice way to reintroduce that. We can also superimpose some cervical rotation on top of that, which will actually improve our ability to expand the upper dorsal rostral area and finish off that flexion without the compressive strategy. Okay, impingement number 3. So this is the classic painful arc test. So this would be traditional shoulder abduction at 90 degrees and plus or minus about 30 or so, and this is dorsal rostral compression from start to finish. And so this is from about the spine of the scapula downward. And so number one, we want to avoid anything that's going to compress that dorsal rostral area. So bilateral compressive exercises like rowing, bilateral I's, T's, and Y's, bilateral face pulls off the table. Now, you may be able to perform these unilaterally if you can maintain a yielding strategy on the non-concentric overcoming side. So as I pull towards me this way, that's going to be the concentric overcoming. I got to capture a yielding strategy on this side. If you can do that, then you can do these activities unilaterally. But to do them bilaterally, it's a bad idea because all you're doing is compressing that area. Okay? Now, We still have all of our posterior yielding exercises that we can do. So again, we've got some of those prone variations, but one of my favorite things to do in this situation is go to my Better Band pull apart video on YouTube, or anything that couples the yielding strategy in the dorsal rostral area with shoulder external rotation. What happens under these circumstances is you're actually turning the scapula into what would be, I believe, traditional internal rotation of the scapula, which actually expands that dorsal rostral space to even a greater degree. Love those exercises for this situation. So this would be your typical painful arc strategy. So there you go. You got 3 impingements, 3 strategies, 3 solutions. Now, here's the bonus for all of you people that actually watch these videos all the way through. All 6 of you, I think. All right, there's one more impingement that people talk about, and that's the one that occurs on the back side of the shoulder. So you'll hear it called posterior impingement or internal impingement, okay? This is a pump handle problem, but I don't have the dorsal rostral compression under these circumstances. So here's what you get to do, all right? We got prone activities to bring the pump handle up, but here's the kicker. This is when you get to use your bilateral rows, your bilateral face pulls, and your bilateral I's, T's, and Y's, because I have expansion there, and if I compress that area a little bit, I can push the pump handle up even more. So that's a really cool strategy for us to wrap up with. Mihail, awesome question. If I did not answer your question sufficiently, please let me know at askbillhartman@gmail.com. And we'll see you tomorrow morning on the Coffee and Coaches Conference Call. Have a fabulous Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow morning.